your time and commitment to the implementation of evidence-based practices. My name is Jen Collins, and on behalf of the statewide MTSS team, our intent this year is to offer a variety of research to practice opportunities that span the K-12 spectrum. Teams will receive a review of a specific evidence-based practice and/or practices, in this case, in the area of micro-level writing, strategy instruction, fidelity tools to support implementation, the opportunity to formally evaluate the impact of the evidence-based practice and/or practices on student outcomes, as well as a forum to share your experiences with others following an implementation period. Over the course of the 22-23 academic school year, we'll be addressing class-wide intervention, Tier 3 problem solving for reading, response to intervention, secondary writing and reading, and evidence-based practices within a UDL MTSS framework. For our teams who complete a given research to practice experience, you'll be awarded a digital badge to honor your efforts and commitment to enhancing student outcomes. So thank you so much again for joining today and for all that you do as educators. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kirsten DeRoche, to start our day. Thanks, Kirsten.
Sure. Thank you, Jen. And once again, welcome this morning to Secondary Micro-Level Writing Strategy Instruction Part 1. An intro to micro-level writing strategy and our fidelity tool with Dr. Lena Santoro Edwards. I'm Kirsten DeRoche. I'm an educational consultant from the Patton Malvern office. I'll be one of your facilitators this morning. If you happen to need closed captioning, please click on the button and the transcript should be visible. My colleagues and I will be monitoring the chat for questions or any technical needs. Please feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any needs. Once again, please join me in welcoming Dr. Lena Edwards Santoro. Dr. Santoro is a research professor with the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development at Boston University. She currently serves as co-principal investigator of the National Lead for Literacy Center and the lead of the Instruction and Intervention strand for the National Center on Improving Literacy. With both centers, she works on projects related to professional learning, technical assistance, and instructional intervention for students with literacy-related disabilities. Dr. Santoro is also serving as co-PI on a project focused on the development and pilot testing of a Tier 3 literacy intervention and has served as co-PI on a series of IES research studies focused on classroom discourse, vocabulary, and comprehension of students at risk of reading and writing failure. She has also taught pre- and in-service teachers and leaders at the undergraduate and graduate level, presented extensively on how to apply evidence-based instructional strategies in the classroom, and consulted with state, local, and private agencies, including her recent work with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, to develop content related to MTSS implementation in the areas of writing and intensive intervention for students with dyslexia and language-based challenges in reading. Welcome, Lena. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, and good morning, everybody. I'm just thrilled to be here and have some time to talk about micro-level writing strategy and instruction with you today. I'll take some time to give you an overview of the session, and then we'll shift into the content a bit. In terms of overview, I want you to know that the content that I'm sharing today had been developed within the context of Patton's multi-tiered systems of support initiative with a focus on writing. And so there's a large team of Patton consultants and experts in the field who helped conceptualize this content and think about how it works within the context of multi-tiered systems of support. So while I have the pleasure to present today, this work stands on the shoulders of others and their conceptualization. I know you, I've probably found at this point the materials link, the handouts link in the chat. I have lots of documents to share with you today, but on the screen, you'll see the top 5, the ones that I really want you to be able to have access to. That's priority to follow along with the session. So the first is I want to share this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint includes strategies you can take to the classroom. And so I want you to be able to access this document, take it and make it yours if you're going to embed some of these strategies in classroom instruction. So look for the main document. The main PowerPoint is the first primary document. As you see on their screen, I've been able to list materials and the file name. So if you're looking at your files, you can make the correspondence. The second thing I want you to have is the writing scope and sequence. So this is a real comprehensive document, again, developed by our writing committee within the context of our multi-tiered system of support initiative. And it details the skills and strategies that students need to be able to do in writing across grades K through 12. There's two versions of the scope and sequence. One is where you can see everything kind of in one document, an all inclusive plan. The other is divided by grade level. So it's easier to break out and find a grade level that you might be teaching, and you can align the skills through that lens. The third thing that we'll be looking at today is something called the Smarter Balanced Rubric. The Smarter Balance rubric is an analytic rubric that we can use to score student writing samples. That's going to be a key document for implementation and will be part of how I discuss connecting writing assessment to instructional intervention. We'll talk more about that as I present, but that's something I want you to be aware of that's included in your files. The fourth is a document that includes our fidelity of implementation tool. It's called Fidelity Checklists. There's one primary checklist that aligns with the instruction I'll be speaking about today, and then a second tool that's a little bit more comprehensive and would be perfect for a team reflection and review. So a preview of that, but we'll look at that in greater detail. And then finally, in my top 5 of the resources I've shared is a team presentation template. As Jen Collins introduced our session, she referred to the opportunity to come and present and share on your implementation of our research to practice or evidence-based strategies. And that team presentation template will be central to being able to come back and discuss your implementation with us as a group. So note that. Anyway, these are our top 5 materials I want you to look for and have access to. And my patent colleagues are sharing the link to a folder where you'll find these things in the chat box. If you have any questions, just write your questions in the chat and we'll make sure we help address them. So as you know, because you're in our Zoom session, we're planning to use the Zoom platform today. The way that I want to correspond today, just to make it easier, is to use the chat box. That's the primary way to dialogue with each other. So for example, if you have a question, please pose it in the chat box. If you want to expand on something I say, or something resonates with you, or you have an aha, you're welcome to put your thinking into that chat box so we can dialogue with you. What we'll do, or what I'll do, is I will pause every so often during reflection points in the presentation, and I'll check in with my patent team, Kirsten and colleagues, to see if any of your questions have not been addressed, and it would be helpful for me to speak to them or to make any clarifications. So we may not answer your question immediately, but we will have these pause points throughout our session where we can discuss the content together. We're also an opportunity for me to check in with you to see if you have any questions at the moment, or if I can help with clarification. So I want you to really leverage this chat box. There'll also be opportunities for activities as we go to simulate some of the instruction or to help you reflect on practices. And related to that, I'll prompt you, but I'll want you to respond in the chat box with a response so that we can get a simulation and see how instruction might work in the classroom. So we're just full on use that chat box today and not worry about some of these annotation features. In addition to that, we have some breakouts planned where you'll have an opportunity to meet with each other and talk about the content, reflect a little bit, pause, sort through it. So when we come up on those breakouts, we'll give our patent colleagues an opportunity to get you sorted into those breakout rooms. And I will provide a prompt, a set of questions for you to consider during that breakout room time. Breakouts for this session won't be so structured. My intent is for you to really just discuss the content to that point in time and bring any reflections back to the larger group. In addition, I want to add some other logistics to the table as we are gearing up to get started here. As Jen Collins said, we have the opportunity this year to follow a series of evidence-based practices to implementation. Essentially, that means we will have a session focused on content, and I'll present some strategy instruction on a given topic and how it can be implemented in the classroom. We'll have a follow-up session, and as you can see, the follow-up session to today is November 3rd. With our November 3rd session, your ticket in the door is to have prepared a presentation on implementation. So the whole purpose of coming back to November 3rd is if you've had the opportunity to implement and if you're ready to share with us and present, and we can talk about how things went or didn't go well, we'll break it down and problem solve. So notice today we're focused on micro level writing instruction. We'll have an opportunity to debrief and discuss your implementation on November 3rd. There's another set of research or evidence-based practice to implementation sessions starting in November. One, at least presented by me, focuses on core reading instruction, and we'll have the team presentations and implementation in January. And then finally, in the winter, we'll have a session on macro level writing strategy instruction and an opportunity to come back in the spring and present on implementation. So following the series, I will have a very structured and approach of sameness, if you will, to connect all this content. So I see moving from micro level writing to core reading strategy instruction to macro level writing as a series within itself. You don't have to attend all, but you're welcome to certainly come to those content sessions. And if you implement, please come back with a presentation to that follow-up. We'd love to debrief and discuss the work. So for today's session specifically, I want to provide some information just to set the stage and context of what we're doing. With implementation in writing instruction, assessment is so key to how we look at our instruction. So I want to begin by looking at how we link assessment and instruction from the writing perspective. And then I want to get into some instructional strategies you can take out the door. These instructional strategies today focus on micro level writing. These are things related to the fluency and transcription of how students write. They're related to syntax. Sometimes we think of that as grammar. And then also mechanics. So we'll look at instructional strategies to support these areas of student writing performance. And then finally, I'm going to spend a little time at the end of our session on implementation. So given all that we talk about today in the session, how can you take this, go out the door and actually implement the strategy and hopefully come back and present and share your experience with us at that November 3rd session. So I'm going to focus on these learning outcomes. I want you to be able to identify how to assess student performance in written expression, specifically in the area of micro level writing skills. I want you to be able to score student writing samples using an analytic rubric and something called measurable components. Then identify the instructional strategies that align with those, with the areas of need that your assessment revealed. And then finally implement. So yes, we're focused on taking this and putting it into the classroom practice. Ticket out the door, right, is to really try to implement and use these strategies in your classroom. Let me just preview. This is a preview of some key conceptual framework conceptualizations that I will focus on today. So not to go over in depth quite yet, but I want you to see these slides and then recognize when they come back in again. So definitely we will be focusing on an assessment to instruction process. And that assessment to instruction process involves collecting student writing samples and scoring them, and then using that information to answer the following question at the bottom of the slide. So if students have difficulty with fill in the blank, fluency, syntax, mechanics. What are some strategies that I can teach to improve student writing performance? This is an example of an instructional template that I'll be using across all of my sessions that I showed you. We're coming up this year. We're focusing on instructional planning for fluency and transcription, as well as conventions today. And then finally, here is the template that aligns fluency and transcription with the conventions that we'll be talking about. So this is a really good one to come back to. So if you've got any notes there, make a note to return to this instructional planning template. It shows you how assessment is aligned. Again, all things we'll be covering today. I just wanted you visually to be able to capture some of the key framing of the session. And finally, framing tool is the implementation fidelity checklist itself. It's a one-pager. There's 11 items, and these items are aligned with the session content. So we'll review this at the end of the session before you leave today, and just double check to make sure that that we've talked about each of these items and that they are clear and resonate with you related to implementation. So that's the overview. That's where we are right now. Odds and ends to get started. So let me give you just a quick context, because I think it's so important when you pop into sessions, specifically within our virtual world these days, where you are situated within the context of how all this content applies. And the thing that I want you to understand is that this is applicable to multi-tiered systems of support. So if you and your team are implementing a multi-tiered system of support, the strategies that we're talking about today are foundational. They can be used to enhance your core instruction. They can be used to enhance your core instruction for all kids, or they can be used to enhance your instruction for a small subset of your students. So if you're doing some small group work and you have a group of students who require additional intensity or instructional intervention on syntax, these strategies from today will apply. So we're looking at, in a secondary model, on enhancing that core instruction, either for all students or a subset of students. And so this will feel tier 1, tier 2-ish if you're familiar with an elementary model, but for a secondary model where we're really looking at those core enhancements. Primary purpose of what we're doing today and throughout the series of webinars this academic year is to root instructional intervention in evidence, right? And what the research and what the evidence says works for students. And so given that we are looking at evidence-based practices, I want to share with you the foundational documents that summarize that research. These are perfect for teacher study groups, by the way, or a professional learning community. The first is the reading next report, and the second is a writing next report. These reports on the left-hand side of your screen come from the Carnegie Corporation and are essentially comprehensive, systematic literature reviews about what the research says works in reading for adolescents and for writing for our secondary learners. And they're distilled within the context of these documents. On the right-hand side of your screen are a couple of documents from the Institute of Education Sciences. These are called practice guides, and they, again, similar approach where the research has been analyzed and synthesized, and set of practices for implementation have been distilled. So taking what the research says, for example, and identifying the 3 to 6, maybe sometimes, primary practices that work for students. I'm sharing both the adolescent literacy and writing documents because I think it's important to see both. I know you're probably looking at these dates, 2004, 2007, 2008, and they may reflect or connect to you as potentially outdated. I want to say they are not from the perspective of what we know about writing instruction and reading instruction for our secondary students. The research is current, and more recent research has been confirmatory, right? It has not refuted anything in these documents. So anything more current is basically confirming that these practices are solid and that they work. If you want to differentiate the reports, Writing Next report, for example, from the practice guide, the IES practice guide, the Writing Next report, I think of as the what. It details what we should focus on in terms of instruction for students in grades 4 through 12. The what is essentially a variety of strategies. What works best for students in grades 4 through 12? The use of writing strategies, use of summarization, collaborative writing, setting product goals, word processing, sentence combining. Other strategies that didn't have as strong as effect of the ones in the two boxes on the left, but are still worth noting, are the use of pre-writing, inquiry activities, studying models, right? Like mentor texts, and you can see the others. What I want you to see is that despite large or strong, medium or mild effects, how strong the effect was in the research, there is instructional power when you use these strategies strategically. So my message is, don't discount the set just because it has a mild effect on student outcomes. You can build a stronger effect when you combine them strategically with other practices. Notice, however, that the ones we're talking about today, the writing strategies, as well as sentence combining, are very strong in terms of outcomes for kids. So anyway, my note is that this report, the Writing Next report, focuses on the what. These are some things that can be taught as strategies to students. The IES practice guide is more about the how. So the IES practice guide is to help guide implementation and to support the practices, how they're delivered, how they're taught. And so some of the to highlight from the IES practice guide, it's telling us that the best instruction, the instruction that works most effectively for students, is to explicitly teach these writing strategies, explicitly teach them, and to use something called a model, practice, reflect instructional cycle. What does that mean? Model, practice, reflect. It essentially is analogous to model, guided practice, independent practice. But for a secondary student, independent practice is now elevated to reflection on how my writing is going. How can I improve my writing instruction, for example? So note that explicit instruction carries through, and we use a model, practice, reflect instructional cycle. So teach and demonstrate it, practice with students, guide their practice, do it with them, and then have students reflect on that, on their writing as they become independent writers. That's the independent phase. Other things from the IES practice guide, which I will emphasize throughout today, is importance of integrating reading and writing. Make those connections for kids. Don't isolate your reading from your writing. And then finally, we're going to be doing this using assessments to inform the instruction you're using. So you can see the difference between, I hope, the reports, which tell you some what to teach, and it's differentiated from the how in the IES practice guides. What I want you to note is that the IES practice guide helps set up our fidelity. And so you'll see that I've used these things as items, use these elements of effective instruction as elements on your fidelity checklist. So we'll be looking at thinking about whether or not in instruction something's fully implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. Another really great foundational resource that helps you see where evidence-based practice comes from, where we're drawing our practices from, is the Cedar Center. The Cedar Center, like other national centers, has the charge of helping disseminate evidence-based practices. There's a wonderful document written by Gary Troya, who's a leading researcher in our field. He compiled the evidence-based practices for writing instruction relevant to secondary learners. You can just take a look at the screenshots here, the sorts of things that are covered in this document. So evidence-based writing practices, what are the essential components? What are the suggestions for implementation? So now we're looking at different practices that align with those essential research-based or evidence-based components, and their details in this report. This would be a wonderful professional learning community document, by the way, as are the Writing Next report and IES practice guides. So you could use a combination of these or pick one and study it. But if you're really serious about this work and your team implementation, I highly suggest looking at one of these resources for that purpose. All of them are telling us something really important that we'll discuss as we have our series together, is that our micro level structure in writing, which is your handwriting, your keyboarding, your spelling, mechanics, some level of grammar, sentence structure, has to connect and be supportive of that macro structure that students do. So the ability to engage in the writing process, to combine sentences and make them more sophisticated, to put vocabulary to good use. And so the connector between your micro and your macro is sentence level, right? Your sentences bridge and make that connection. You can see it differently here. Joan Sedita created something called the writing rope. And if you're familiar with reading instruction, you know that there's a reading rope, Scarborough's rope, that shows how foundational skills in reading connect into a higher level aspect of comprehension. And here's very similar. So if you see the skills related to composition, that's your macro level structure. Then below, your transcription is your micro level structure. The skills involved to produce the text, to get that text on a paper, whether or not you're handwriting it or writing by keyboard. What's key in that twining of this rope is how it's held together. What in that twist of the rope is central, and that's your grammar. That's your sentences. Your work at a sentence level is connecting your higher order, your macro level processing with the micro, the production of the text. So sentences bridge, right? Sentences bridge. So the sentences are your bridge between that production of text and your larger macro structure, the being able to compose and think about your writing and engage in that process. So this is important for today because we're focusing more on grammar on down in the writing rope. We're looking at those foundational skills in writing and how to help students build fluency with those skills. And so that's where we really want to help reinforce student writing, because as you all know, any kind of obstacle that students have with the production of text connects to their inability to express their ideas and what they want to say in writing. So we're looking essentially from a writing rope perspective of the grammar part to the lower strands that we're braiding into that rope. Joan Sedita now has published a book called The Writing Rope, a framework for explicit writing instruction, excuse me. I highly recommend it. It's a very practical, evidence-based approach to writing instruction. And she cover some of the micro level skills we'll share today. And in fact, I have a couple excerpts from her book I want to share to reinforce some of our content. So again, this is a great resource to add to your library if you don't have it yet. And it is also a great tool for professional learning communities. So I'm going to pause right here. I want you in the chat to think about your students and to think about their work in writing. Are micro level skills an issue for your students? Think for a moment about it. It's the handwriting, the keyboarding, the spelling, and sentence work, sentence structure, syntax, grammar. Are those things an issue? You can answer in the chat. You can say yes, definitely. You could say sort of, that they're emerging, right? And that there's still some things to work on. Or I love it if someone said not at all, but I doubt that's the reality. But you're welcome to input those ideas in the chat, and I'll just check in now to see if there are any questions. So I see Adam is saying yes. Yeah, and Elizabeth, especially within the last few years. Abigail also. Thanks. Yes. I know. Thanks, Joyce. I absolutely, for our special education students, absolutely. These are foundational and are so hard. So hard for kids. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for your responses. Oh, I know. Thank you for saying something about texting. It definitely has changed the formality of writing. And they become frustrated. I think the main thing is kids, and you know this probably more so than me because you feel it, you're right there with those students. But it's very self-defeating. If I'm just locked up in the inability to produce text, my spelling it's hard. I am having trouble forming sentences the right way. It just really I'm just not able to express my ideas, and it's hard. It's really hard to watch. There's an activity that I sometimes do in these trainings, and I just will tell you about it. And if you want to stimulate kind of on your own and see the effects, you're welcome to do it. One of the things I've done to get at this point is to ask people to switch. So do you write a composition or write an essay by hand, but try to do it with your non-dominant hand. And what the experience is that you could just see how important the transcription skills are, and what an obstacle it is if you don't have fluent transcription skills to compose. So you're welcome to play around with that a little bit as I continue, but I also want to check in with Kirsten and see if we have questions so far. We're good. Good. Yeah, thanks everybody. So
Lena,
that
Dr. Santora, I didn't notice any questions as well. I think
good.
Everybody
Yeah,
seems to be going well.
good. Thanks, Karen. Thank you.
But Lena, I did want to say I put a link in right before. The patent literacy team is facilitating a course and a book study around Joan Sedita's writing rope.
Good.
So I put the link if anybody's interested in checking that out a little bit further. The link is in the chat. I can put it again, and they're welcome, of course.
Yeah, wonderful. What a great opportunity. Nice. Yeah. It's I love the book. It's a great resource. So another resource that connects foundationally here is the writing scope and sequence that we developed in Pennsylvania within the context of the writing work done in the MTSS initiative. It's very comprehensive. And as you can see just from the screenshot, what we have looked at is micro level skills and macro level skills, and then across the grades, K through 12. And you'll see the little B, D, and S's. B is beginning. That means the skill is just beginning. You're just introducing it. D is the skill now is developing. And then S is for secured. So it's a common way to look at a scope and sequence. what's really important I want you to see, and actually I might stop my screen here, screen share, and bring up another screen for you. Let's see if I can get it. Yes, hopefully you can see this. I've just, and can you all see that? Okay. Yeah, but you can see the scope and sequence, for example, in my PDF version right here. And I'm showing you the conventions section where we've got transcription skills listed. Then we have mechanics, your punctuation, your capitalization, etc. And it'll go down into parts of the sentence. And looking from left to right, you'll then see across the top, the K through 12, and where skills are secured, developing, beginning. It's, I think, a tremendously helpful document to help you focus on instruction or know where kids' skills are emerging and where they need to go. So those access to the scope and sequence is in the Google Drive and the materials that you have for this session, but that's a real important one to know where it is and where to find it. So I'm just I'm gonna pause for a minute, make sure you can get to that scope and sequence, take a look at the convention section and transcription section, and just see, take a glance there. I'm gonna just pause a minute. I won't, I'll stop my talking and let you take a look for a moment.
Dr. Santoro,
Yes.
we put the link to the live binder into the chat so that folks can have all access to all of that. And then it's in the one of the drop down links to the live binder.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. I'm so glad you all have access to that. It's one in the files and materials for the session, and the second it is also in that live binder that my patent colleagues have shared with you. So this is, yeah, anyway, I want you to know of how powerful that tool is. So one of the things that's implied, it's not explicit in the scope and sequence, but implied, is that we are looking at how students in the early grades focus on learning the writing process. So our elementary school students are taught about how to compose, how to edit, revise, how to rewrite, the whole process of writing. What happens as we get into the secondary levels is we start to assume to some degree that students understand that writing process, and that we start to teach them instead writing strategies in support of it. So there's this sort of subtle shift. And where does that happen? Fourth, fifth, sixth, maybe grade. And then what we're doing is we're teaching writing strategies to students that can reinforce the process, because now kids know to write, to plan, to organize, write, edit, revise, and rewrite. They know the process, or we think they know the process. And so now what we do is layer in writing strategies for them in areas of need to be supportive of it. And so that's really key. Since we're kind of tilting towards secondary in the content today, that whole idea of what is a writing strategy that you can teach students is really part of that shift, developmental shift in how we approach it. And as you saw, I'm back to the findings from the Writing Next report. Writing strategies have such a strong effect. So what I'm telling you is that what we're going to talk about today is powerfully reinforced by what the research says work for kids. So strategy is essentially a set of operations or actions that a person consciously undertakes to accomplish a goal. It's how do I go from A to B? How is that progression? What do I do to accomplish that? So if I'm struggling with syntax, what is something I can do to get better at it? And we have strategies today to help support students. The other trend, I think that you want to pay attention to that is coming out of our writing and research work is this idea that because writing is such an integration of multiple skills, we've got to plug away at it. So writing is not something that you can do every Friday and expect to have payoff. It's something that should occur every day with some dedicated instructional time. I love Anita Archer. Some of you may know her. She is a dynamic, incredible instructor. She presents extensively on explicit instruction and the use of evidence-based practices. One of the things that she says is that we want to aim for short writing often, not long writing seldom. So for example, when the TDA is looming, we start like working on writing instruction. And what we want to do is say that we're going to do a little every day all the time. Short writing often, not long writing seldom. And so the instructional strategies I'll share, I hope you will find ways to fit them into this mantra, this short writing often, not long writing seldom. So you've got the context, you know where we're situated now. We're talking about strategies that can support students in secondary within the context of their core reading and writing, core ELA. These are strategies applicable to all students, or they can be used with a subset of students. I'm glad I have special education teacher here. They can be used with precision with our special education students at their level. So that's where we're talking. Now we'll get into how do we link assessment and instruction. Remember, we're driving this question through. If students have trouble with fill in the blank, this is an instructional strategy that I can use to help address that need. If students have difficulty with fluency, we want to look at conventions, specifically syntax and mechanics. So that's what we're going to dive into. At the conclusion of this section, by the way, you will have a breakout to talk about your assessment, your current assessment practices, and how you might want to enhance them with some of the tools and ideas that I'm going to share. So just be ready, again, a heads up, a preview that we'll have a breakout at the end of this session where you have an opportunity to talk with colleagues about your current assessment practices in writing. And then anything that you want to do to move forward to make it more systematic, routine, etc. Okay. So linking assessment and instruction. I like this visual. This is not mine. This is Patton. This is a visual and conceptualization developed in your state at Patton. And that's when we're trying to solve a problem in the classroom or at a school level or at a district level. We're going to focus on that problem and we're going to celebrate our small wins. So in this session, we're diving deep into the details on micro level writing instruction. That is the overarching problem, right? As you all said, you identified the problem in the chat. You said, yes, my students are having trouble with micro level writing skills. We're going to talk about how to get even more precise about that problem. What within micro level writing skills is the issue? Again, is it fluency and transcription? Is it conventions? And in conventions, we're going to drill down and decide if it's going to be syntax or mechanics. Then we're going to talk about what we're going to do. That's essentially your intervention. That's your strategy instruction. I'm hoping to support you to do it and do it well when you implement. And then you're going to look at data and see if it worked. So this is the cycle that we'll be using. And right now, through our assessment, we want to identify what that problem is. So taking a look at this instructional planning template in more detail, I introduced a preview with you at the start of the session. So when we think about reading and writing at the secondary level, the things I want to sort out with my students is if they, on the far left, have trouble with language, expressive, receptive, can they retell, can they summarize, what's their vocabulary like? I want to know what their fluency is and their transcription when they're writing, and we are talking about that today. So that's marked in red, in a red box. I want to look at the substance of their composition. Do they have organization to it? Is it focused? Have they developed their ideas? Not talking about that today, but that's one of the things we look at. And then on the far right, we want to pay attention to the conventions. Notice we're drilling into conventions. Conventions, broadly speaking, is composed of two things: syntax and mechanics. And within syntax, we want to look at the words students use and how they're using them. And we want to look at sentence structure. That's traditionally, right, the grammar, parts of speech, that's that. And then within mechanics, we're looking at spelling as well as the punctuation, capitalization skills. So conventions, we're going to drill down there, and fluency is, transcription is your production of text. Can you produce that text fluently? There are 3 steps to collecting and scoring a student writing sample to help answer the question if students have difficulty with, what are some strategies I can use to improve student writing performance? The way that we have to look at student writing is through student writing. And so we're collecting student writing samples. Students are responding to some kind of prompt. So with opinion writing, for example, I might ask students to tell me if they think we should have school uniforms or not. They respond to that prompt. Typically what we do and what we've done in the Pennsylvania writing work within the context of MTSS is to have students respond to a prompt. So they get the opportunity to read that prompt and then for a minute, do some planning. It's not long. And they can plan however they'd like to plan. They can jot down notes. They can do a quick outline. They can write down words they want to use. But that planning component, it gives students an opportunity to collect their thinking. Then the time starts and they have 20 minutes to respond to that prompt. We'll get into some nuances around timing and writing these writing prompts, but that's general guidance. So there's a writing prompt, students plan for a minute, they're timed for 20 minutes to compose an essay. The question is, how often are you doing these writing prompts? I think every 3-ish weeks, 3 to 4. You'll see when we walk out the door today that we're going to ask you if you want to implement. You'll probably do a sample at the beginning of the month and then at the end of the month for the purpose of this implementation. But in general, it's about 3-ish weeks. You can do so. I'll say 2 to 4 weeks. We'll score it using an analytic rubric. So you're familiar with these analytic rubrics, and I'm sure some of you or all of you are using some sort of analytic rubric. It has the domains aligned with writing quality, and you're scoring on a scale of like 0 to 3 or 0 to 2, depending, 0 to 4, depending on your rubric. We're going to add a second way to score. We're going to score measurable components, and I just want you to hold that. Don't think about that right now. We'll get into that as I talk about fluency and your conventions and mechanics. There are systems that'll help you implement writing, including AIMSweb is a progress monitoring system that has a written expression component. So if you have AIMSweb and you're using that for progress monitoring, you'll have access to the writing component of that. There's one that we've used in the past year or two in the writing initiative in the state called StartPaw. So there are some of these systems out there that help make scoring and help make the administration easier. And some of them come with prompts, so you're not trying to design your prompts. we talk about the analytic rubric first, and then I'm going to give you some directions on where you can find a bunch of things to help support the assessment. So a good analytic rubric aligns with the quality features of writing, And these include if a composition or essay is focused, if it's organized well, if the content is substantive, that it's written with style, so your personality on paper, and the conventions check out, right? The conventions are clearly and accurately and appropriately used. So generally, an analytic rubric might be divided into these, what we call domains, that assess these various quality writing components. There's a writing rubric that I'm quite fond of and that we've used in Pennsylvania in our writing initiative over the past several years. It's called the Smarter Balanced Rubric. You have access to the Smarter Balanced rubrics in the materials today. I know you can also get them online. They are also in the MTSS writing folder that my Pat and colleagues gave you access to. But let me here switch over and show you what they look like. So hopefully you can see my screen here. And the Smarter Balanced rubric. They're appropriate for grades 3 through 11. Here's an example of the grades 3 through 5 rubric that focuses on information explanatory writing. And you'll see the Smarter Balanced rubrics have 3 domains. On the far left, you can score purpose organization as one domain. And then you have the benchmark descriptions of what makes a 4, what makes a 3, a 2, and a 1. And then something that gets a 0 is not scoreable, basically. The second of 3 domains is evidence and elaboration for information explanatory writing. And again, you can see the benchmarks, the descriptions of what makes a 4 versus a 2. And so you're scoring each domain, as you know, right? And then finally, conventions. You get a convention score. So you score each domain, and then you get a total score for this rubric. You'll see in the packet you have the Smarter Ballot rubric covers narrative writing, it covers informative explanation, and it covers opinion writing, which you'll see right here. These are grades 3 through 5. Your other grades are represented in the packet too. So let me switch back over to my PowerPoint and pick it up. So what I want you to understand is how the Smarter Balanced rubric works. This is my recommended rubric. It has been developed, it's one of the recommended rubrics from Gary Troya, who I showed you earlier had helped compile evidence-based practices for writing instruction for the Cedar Center. I like just the way it works, and I like how it's designed. So focus, I told you there's these quality features of writing. They're listed on the left-hand side of this table. And what the Smarter Balanced rubric does is it collapses a couple of them into a domain or a category. So focus and organization is collapsed into the category for organization purpose. So one domain there. Instead of having content is one thing and style is another thing, it's collapsed it. And so if you're looking at informational opinion writing, you're looking at the evidence elaboration domain that's reflective of content and style. And conventions is conventions. And as I told you, 2 components we're looking at. We're looking at the general syntax and we're looking at the mechanics of writing. Here's the example for narrative writing. Same, focus and organization as quality features are collapsed into one single domain called organization and purpose. And then content and style are collapsed into something in narrative writing called development and elaboration. And then you have conventions. And again, it's scored. Score each domain. and then get a total score. So you'll have a domain score and a total score. Conventions looks like this. Conventions as a domain doesn't change because conventions is conventions, doesn't change if you're writing opinion argumentative writing versus narrative writing versus informational explanatory. Conventions is conventions. So you are scoring with a 2, 1, or 0 in this case. Note slide 38 if you're here with a team. This table provides prompts to help you get into a discussion about your use of analytic rubrics. I think this is wonderful for team processing. So asking how you're using analytic rubrics to inform instruction. What are the strengths of your rubric? What don't you like about your rubric? Are you meeting periodically to review this data from your rubric? How are you analyzing data? Are you seeing growth with your analytic rubric? And so forth. So these are really nice processing questions that you can bring into a team meeting, or if you're combining a team meeting with the series in any kind of way, I would definitely come back. If I have any leaders here today, come back and look at slide 38. So I said there are 3 steps. You administer the writing prompt. You score it with your analytic rubric. That's your step 2. And your 3rd step is to score the measurable components, which we're holding. We're going to hold on the measurable components. So if you're looking for information and you want to find more to support your work, definitely poke around that live binder that Karen and my colleagues today have given you a direction to access. It's also listed on this slide too, so you have this information and can come back to it. If you're in that live binder that we're sharing access to, go look at the writing assessment directions tab, and you'll find sample writing prompts. You'll find the Smarter Balanced rubrics, guidelines to score things collaboratively, monthly directions for assessment. So all of that is in that live binder. So I want you to get geared up for a breakout room now. I want you to start to think about how you are assessing student writing performance. Do you have a rubric, and how is it working for you? For example, what do you need to add or enhance to make your assessment more systematic? If you're not looking at data in an ongoing way, systematic way, what routines or scheduling considerations do you need to figure out to have assessment occur on a more regular basis in writing assessment? So here are some of the things you can think about. And I've just listed it on the slide. You can take a screenshot of this, get your camera, take a picture of the slide, but a general conversation about what's happening with writing assessment is what I'm interested in having you think about. What's working, what's not working, how can you enhance your current assessment procedures to include what I said, some kind of 20-minute writing assessment. I'm going to say 2 to 4 weeks. Generally, we're going to have to edge on it for implementation, but it's generally 2 to 4 weeks with that writing prompt. If you get in your groups, please put your cameras on to share, talk with each other. Also, can you please select a team leader or a group leader who can help facilitate and then maybe bring some of your thinking back to the group. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to give my patent colleagues some time to get you into these groups. I will try to pop in, so don't let me surprise you. I'm try to come in and join your group and introduce myself and see how you're thinking about some of this content. So anyway, yeah, Kirsten, I'll send it back to you to get our groups going.
Okay, so we may need to rethink this a little bit. I currently have breakout rooms available for folks for the school districts that we had as teams register, but I don't know who belongs to which district. So I think our original plan was to open the rooms and allow people to self-select where they went. But I don't know if how many people we have from each of those. So Lena, how long did 20 minutes?
Let's do 12 minutes. Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
sorry.
No, that's right.
So we'll,
Buddy, welcome back. I would love to hear some highlights from your conversations, and you're welcome to come off mute and just share out. We're a smaller group, so I think we can handle the interaction that way, which is wonderful. Yeah, highlights from your discussion on assessment. Yeah, as you are coming back, I'm asking for you to share any highlights from your discussion on assessment. So using a writing prompt and then scoring it with an analytic rubric. You're welcome to come off mute and share. Yeah, no highlights. Well, I will just share one from the group I popped in on. So one of the things we talked about was having students score their own writing prompt with the rubric. And I thoroughly and 100% think that that's a fabulous idea. It connects to the research, right? Having kids reflect about their writing. So giving them the opportunity to use that rubric and self-score, I think is a really key thing. The other thing we talked about within that context was we have teachers with larger classrooms of students, and I think the downside to writing assessment is the length of time it takes to score things, right? And so one of the things you can do if you have implemented some kind of writing prompt, let's just say every month or every 3 weeks, one of the things you can do is the teacher can score a subset, maybe half, right? And then the other half of the students on that round will score themselves. That way you can look at their, right? You can look at their scores and they're still accountable. Then at the next time that you're giving a prompt, you basically switch, right? You'll take time to score the sample that you didn't in the previous prompt, and that other set of students will self score. So I think that's I love that aspect to the conversation we had in my group. Yeah, other things you're welcome to add to the chat. Please do so if you had some good insights and takeaways for next steps. One of the things I want to catch before I start my next section of content is a question that occurred in the chat about TDAs and how this session connects. Such a good question. So how it connects really is what we're talking about today are your fundamental foundational writing skills, these micro level skills that are required to be able to write a fluent, content dense TDA. So if kids don't have the skills we're talking about today, they fundamentally need them to be able to really perform well in the TDA context. So it's almost like these are these these foundational skills. And so if students don't have them, work needs to occur to really help support and build up these skills. That's the link. As your conventions improves, your TDA will also improve, right? Because it's clearer, it's more precise, you're using correct conventions. And so that is the link. So if you're interested in TDA, these are the foundational skills required to be able to do that. So it's a really, what an excellent question, I think, about connection. I'm going to just jump right back over. Now we're going to get into some instructional strategies. I want to present a little bit on this, and then we will take a stretch break. Somewhere between 10 and 10:15, we'll take a stretch break and pause. But let me get some of the instructional strategies started. So within instructional strategies, I'm going to present 3 different things. Strategies to help support student fluency and transcription. That's the first. Then I'm going to present strategies to support student syntax development. That's the second. And then I'm going to conclude with strategies to support mechanics. So those are the three we're looking at: fluency, syntax, mechanics. We're going to look at fluency first. And remember when I said hold on the measurable components. What I'm going to do for fluency, syntax, and mechanics is add in an additional way to score student writing, so you can really track and monitor student growth in this particular area. So imagine this scenario. Let's say you have a classroom where you're able to administer the writing prompt. You score using your analytic rubric for everybody, whether or not you do what I said, like half self-scored, half is with teacher scoring, but you score the whole set with your analytic rubric. Now what I'm going to show you are some ways to score student writing that you might want to do with a subset of kids. Like you might want to drill down and look at student writing performance, because you know these kids might struggle in this area. So I'm going to dig deeper, and I'm going to just take maybe two students or three at, small sample, and dig down and score differently. And how we're going to do this, I want to walk you through it with fluency. So now we're entering into our model. What's the problem? Micro level writing skills, specifically fluency. Students are slow. They're slow with keyboarding. They're slow to produce text. What are some strategies related to building up fluency in writing that I can use? And also, how can I assess that? So if I've got this little subset of kids in my class that really are struggling, I might want to score their writing in a way that I can demonstrate growth and progress monitoring. And so let's just kind of drill down and look at fluency here. One of the ways I can score fluency is to record the number of words written within a specified period of time. And I can just count all the words written. Or I can summarize the average length of the sentences a student writes within a specified period of time. And I'm going to count. Now, this is where there are nuances to writing assessment. I would not recommend that you count all the words written in a 20-minute writing sample. It'll take too long. Or figure out the average length of sentences within a 20-minute writing sample. What I would do is I would do the first 3 minutes as a recommendation. And what I kind of need to train my students in a way to do this. So they're going to go through, they're going to read their prompt, plan for 1 minute. They're going to start writing. And at the 3-minute time point, I'm going to tell them, please draw a line on your paper or put a star and keep writing. I'm going to give them some kind of symbol or code to indicate where that consistent 3-minute time point. And then they're going to continue to write for the rest of the 20 minutes for their composition. I can do that if I'm keyboarding too. So I might say at the 3 minutes, just do 5 periods or, 5 exclamation points to mark where that 3 minutes was, and then just keep writing, keep composing. That will help with scoring. And so I'm showing you an example here. If I wanted to do this on a student writing sample, I'm just fluency total words written. I count total words written. I ignore spelling. I ignore everything. I'm just looking for what represents a word, is representative of a word. I want to know that kids are getting something down on paper. So it's pure down and dirty, count the number of words in that 3-minute sample. You can see there. The other thing you can do is number of sentences written. And so here's an example where I tried to find the end of the sentences. And this is, you're doing your best. I know kid writing and student writing can be confusing. It's hard to tell where one sentence ends and where one doesn't. I'm doing my best to, in this case, find where students are breaking their ideas, and I count. And yes, there could be a case where you have one long run-on sentence for 3 minutes, and that's important to note. That's important to note. Yep. So, but essentially what you're doing is you're digging a little deeper into student writing by counting something. And I say where it's harder to see growth on a rubric score, because your spread is often 0 to 4 or 0 to 3. It's hard to really show gain that way. This is a way to dig in and actually show some gain when you match your instruction, right, to fluency. So that's why I wanted to add in the measurable components. You can certainly do average length of sentences too. So I can look at the first sentence, it had 15 words. The second sentence here had about 6 words. Third sentence, 14, 5 had 9. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see how I created that average length of sentence. Another note with all this, they're not necessarily norms. Not necessarily norms to look up. What I want to do this for is I want to compare, it's called intra-individual, within self. I want to compare where my student is at one point in time and where they are at another point in time. So you're measuring growth against themselves in many cases, and particularly with a number of sentence written, average length of sentences. So that's one way to look. So if I have a student, for example, with really laborious, slow writing, I'm not going to have many sentences written in the first 3 minutes. I'm not going to have many. So I can capture that. And then if I do an intervention, which I'll show you in a minute, to get at fluency, you can see if this is improving. So what I'm going to do now is drill down under fluency and transcription and give you ideas to address that issue or that problem, that challenge that students might be having. And the main thing that we want to help students do is to build up their ease of writing. And so what we can do is something called an instructional warm-up. Just like in reading fluency, if you're familiar with reading, fluency isn't a big intervention that we do for 30 minutes, right? It's kind of you do it to enhance and to reinforce. The same with writing. So this is not something that we do for 30 minutes and we keep doing it and doing it. The strategy here is instructional warm-up. We're going to do an instructional warm-up to get fingers moving, to get words in my head, to practice writing a sentence before I begin. And so that's the whole point of this, is we're warming kids up into writing. And I'll show you some ways we can do it. We can do this by supporting student fluency at any of these different levels. We can do it with handwriting. It can be cursive or manuscript. We can warm up with keyboard. We can warm up spelling. And what we want students to do, the whole objective is just to kind of pick up your pace a little, to pick it up. As I said, an instructional warm-up in your time, it should take 3 to 7 minutes, no more than that. And eventually you want to be able to apply it to their composition, right? So I warm up and then I'm going to go into my writing tasks, my compositional tasks. I consider warm-ups aren't explicit instruction, really. They're this idea of getting you going. So for example, if you have words that you want students to use, these transition words in an essay, like first, next, and last, one of the things I might is warm up on these transition words. So I'll say something like, okay, everybody, before we work on our essays, let's practice some of the words that we're going to describe the beginning, middle, and end. First, I want you to copy the word. Then you could have them cover it and write it. I could then have them compare what they wrote to the model first. Or for some students, I just have this list on the board and I'll say, ready, set, go, write first, next, and last, pencils down. Try it again, everybody. Warm up your fingers, write first, next, and last again. Good. I mean, that's what we want. And you're connecting it to your instruction because you want these words to be there, ready to go in their student's head. So it could be this ready, set, go. We're going to just write these 4 words. More systematically is to follow this model of trace, copy, cover, compare, where I might have students trace if I need them to, then I can have them copy first, next to first, next to next. Then I can have them cover the list and write these words from memory. You can write first, next, and last from memory, and then I check my work. That's compare. So that's another formula to apply to this kind of instructional warm-up. Trace, copy, cover, compare. You can use an iteration of it. Maybe it's copy, cover, compare. We're going to do the 3 C's. There's no, once we get into the details, there's no research per se. Yeah, so warm up transition words. So at a word level, and these are some examples here. I might pick 2 or 3, 4 at most phrases that I know my students will have to include, and I'm going to have them warm up on those. Other is look for hard spelling words. If I'm writing a science summary of what I read in science, kids are going to need to write photosynthesis and chlorophyll. So I might need to say, okay, here's just 2 words. We're going to warm up on these 2 words. Same idea, trace, copy, cover, compare. And you kind of want to have the fun spirit about it. Definitely don't have punishing. We're not writing chlorophyll 10 times. No, we kind of just, we're warming it up. We're warming it up. Any other vocabulary could be used in a warm up too. So if we're thinking about Rosa Parks and want to write an essay, what are some words that describe her? We might brainstorm those, and then we're going to write. We're going to write them. We're warming up. Then we go to our essay. Yeah, adjectives. I'll connect this later to you, but that's the idea. You can warm up at the letter level, the word level. You can do a starter sentence. This might be you could do a sentence level. You could even do something at the paragraph level. But the idea here is you just want to get kids ready, get them focused, warm up on something that they'll need to use in their writing. That's what an instructional warm up is. I'm going to conclude with this idea as well, and then give you some reflection time for any questions with this. One of the things too, we talked about short writing often, not long writing seldom. This fits that to a T. 3 to 7 minutes, instructional warm-ups, not long and laborious. The other thing, and this came out of my breakout group, is the idea of building writing stamina. So by writing every day, doing some kind of instructional warm-up paired with an essay, I am building writing stamina, which over time will contribute to fluency. So that's your long game. What I'm showing here is sort of a short game, right? Because you want to connect this directly to instruction. If you want to build fluency and transcription skills, your long game is to short writing often, not long writing seldom, on an ongoing, consistent basis, which is great. So a few minutes to think about this and ask any questions you might have. I'm going to open up the chat and see if anything comes through, and Pat and colleagues, if there's anything that was raised in the interim. I see Russell, actually, I see Russell's question. Thank you, Russell, from IU26 about would you have middle school and high school students trace? I would if they needed it. That's, I think, related to my suggestion to amend it. Instead of trace, copy, cover, compare, a copy, cover, compare model might be more applicable for your middle school and high school students, generally speaking. I think maybe with our special education students, we still might have some who would require that extra warm up by tracing. So it's an individual student. It's a great question. Yeah, Kirsten, anything else that you see? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to move a little bit further here, and then we'll take a break. So let me just introduce syntax and talk to you about the measurable components, and I think that'll be a perfect time for our break. So we covered transcription. Remember, I said we're going to look at 3 with interventions. Transcription and fluency is our first. Second is syntax. Third is mechanics. Within syntax, we're going to do the same thing. What's the problem? I'm going to show you measurable components in writing assessment that will help you dig deeper to show student growth that I think sometimes your analytic rubric doesn't capture. and we're going to look at interventions. Now, look at this pretty carefully. Again, fluency, syntax, mechanics are our three. Within syntax, I'm looking at two different things. So syntax, we typically think of as grammar, and that is part of it. That's your sentence structure. But syntax also relates to the vocabulary students use and how they are using those words. Because at the base level, syntax moves from parts of speech into how those parts of speech are used, what a word is doing and how it's working within the context and structure of a sentence. So syntax has these two pieces, the vocabulary or the word level use and the sentence structure. And that gives us a way to measure it. So is there correct use of words? Are students using, are they using parts of speech, for example, appropriately? Are they using a word appropriately based on meaning? That's vocabulary. And then the combination of words, is there a correct combination of words within sentences? And that's your sentence structure. So let's go with vocabulary first. We're starting with the measurable components. So digging deeper into student writing assessment. So with syntax vocabulary, I can look at the variety of different words used and the maturity of words used. And I'll show you, let me show you some examples, variety and maturity for vocabulary. So here's an example of a student writing sample on Leonardo da Vinci. And I want to look at variety. What is the variety of words used here to describe? And essentially, I know this is what I do and why I told you I wouldn't score measurable components for all of your students. I would pick the one or two that you need to do intervention with and follow them at this level. But I go through and I look. I see I is used multiple times. I see think is used multiple times. And I'm just going, Leonardo da Vinci is used multiple times because, and I'm going through and I'm crossing out all the words that are used multiple times, right? What I want to do is isolate unique word use. And it does take a little bit of time. So again, I suggest apply this within the first 3 minutes or for the first 100 words only. Do this for the first 100 words only, or the first 3 minutes. I like the first 100 words because that makes it very easy to do your math and to figure out the scoring. So then what I end up with when I translate the student writing a sample, I'm picking through unique words, that, if, great, influence, I get my list here. And so out of the 100 words, there were 38 words that were unique. And now I get a percentage out of total compositions, 38% of the unique words. This gives me a place to start. If I'm really focusing in an intervention on word choice and vocabulary, wow, I can really see some progress if I'm working on this, where I don't get that as much from an analytic rubric. And I want you to show progress. I want you to document progress for this. So this is one way to approach it for variety. For some of your students, they may be able to do this if you teach them, right? They might be able to dig in and teach and help with this calculation. So I said variety and maturity. The other way is to look at mature use. So more sophisticated vocabulary. Now, more sophisticated vocabulary tends to be longer, right? Words of 7 letters or more. I mean, that's from our literature, that's the guidance, 7 letters or more. And so what I can do then, take that writing sample and go through and find the words that are 7 letters or more and circle them. I extract those out, and here's my word list. Leonardo da Vinci was used twice, right? So I get that. That's why it's ×2. This student used influence, because, techniques. Actually, this kid is pretty on with vocabulary. sculptures, paintings, drawings. Again, I like to do it out of the first to 100 words. You don't want to spend all this time on a full composition. You can really get a sense of it in that first 100 words. I tally up how many words I had. I had 10 mature words of 7 letters or more. That's 10% of the essay was mature words. It's great. Now you can give kids a goal, right? You're doing well. 10% is, maybe you just add two more words next time. It's very helpful, I think, to get in. So that's how to dig in and look at vocabulary. Again, you're looking at variety, maturity. Now, if you're working with younger students and they're not getting to these 7 letters or more words, you could set the rule of 5 or more letters. That's okay. You could set 5 or more letters. That's fine. Just be consistent. So always score it that way. Always score 5 or more. Don't waffle between, like, I'm going to score 5 this time. I'm going to go stick with 5. And then at some point, if they've increased their vocabulary, you can then, okay, now I'm looking for 7 or more. And now you can change that approach. So that's vocabulary. So why I'm looking at my time here. Let's stop right here and take a little break. And I'll come back and I'll present on the intervention piece for vocabulary now that you know how to score it. So we're almost 10 after. I want to give you 15 minutes. So let's just call it 10 after. So let's come back at 10:25 and a good break. One of the things I noted in the chat during break was a question about, was that 10% of mature words a good score? And so let's talk about that a little bit. First, let me pull up the example so we can go back to that and take a look right here. So this was the student writing sample. I'm going to show that in my slide view. This was the student writing sample. We circled the words that were 7 letters or more. Then we wrote that word list and tallied those words. And then we got that 10%, right? 10 mature words out of the 100 sampled. So it's a great question. It's a great question and a hard one to answer, because again, when we're looking at the measurable components, what we're looking at is something that's not necessarily norm-based compared to other kids. You're comparing an individual student to themselves. And so what I would do to infer that this might be a okay score is to look at the overall writing sample and see, just out of those 100 words, we are pulling in some pretty sophisticated vocabulary. I think this is a younger student, and I believe it was a 4th or 5th grade sample, if I recall. And so we are looking at a list of words that are pretty sophisticated, techniques and influence and sculptures and paintings. And so while 10% may seem low, when I look at the writing sample itself, you can kind of then infer what that is. I still think I could push the student to add another 1 or 2, maybe 3 words to make the writing richer, more sophisticated. And so though I'm picking up in the sample 10% mature words, I still could push them a little bit to add 1 more, 2 more, 3 words to this composition. So again, when you're looking at the measurable components, we're thinking intra-individual within the student, and that's where we want to get a baseline right here and then see if you can get any gains as you're adding the scoring to your regimen when you're scoring writing samples. Another way to go about it, and this would give you a better indication of whether or not the 10% mature words is good, is sample a larger group in the classroom. So maybe what I might want to do is, if I have a class, I don't know, of 20 kids, the top, middle, bottom group more or less. I might want to just score the top, pull a couple randomly from the top couple of kids, pull some writing samples from the middle, maybe 2, pull a couple writing samples from your lower group. I now have 6 that I want to score, and I'm going to score for mature words, and I'm going to see the range in my classroom. And that will then allow me also to gauge a little bit more precisely where maybe a struggling student might be compared to a student who's performing well on a writing rubric. So that's definitely another approach. You will be able, I want you to, if you walk out the door, I want you to experiment with the measurable components today as you leave and apply this work, and you'll get an idea of how long it takes you and what is involved, and then how many samples you can score realistically. And I think that'll help determine next steps and how you use the measurement. So that's a great question, and not, as you can see, not a clear, direct answer to it. So we looked at the scoring of measurable components for syntax, specifically vocabulary. And now I want to show you, what do we do? What's the intervention? What do we do if students are struggling in this area? How do we connect intervention to assessment? Here's my intervention checklist. These are evidence-based interventions, and I'm going to go through and model and just show you what these look like in instruction. The first one you might be familiar with if you've been following work at Patton recently or the last few years. It's abbreviated IECC. It's adding identify, expand, combine, and create to your syntax or grammar instruction. And I want you to get into the groove of knowing it. IECC, IECC, identify, expand, combine, and create. That's your primary strategy. And then on top of IECC, we're going to add in some skill builders to reinforce what students are learning. Now, remember, we're currently working at the word level. And when it comes to syntax, that is parts of speech and how students focus their attention on an individual word and what that word's job is within a sentence. So I'm thinking about what is, the word September's job in the sentence, or what is the words take a word from the fabulous in the sentence. So what is it doing in the sentence? And this will connect to the vocabulary that we've been talking about from an assessment perspective. So IECC is an instructional approach, a model developed and promoted very effectively by a colleague of mine, William Van Cleve, where we want students to look at a very traditional instruction where we're identifying a particular part of speech within a sentence. Then we're going to work on sentence expansion, targeting that part of speech or element, working on sentence combining and creating. This package of sentence work really helps reinforce student understanding of syntax. And in this case, we're applying it to parts of speech. So instruction using IECC, identify, expand, combine, and create, is brief, short writing often, not long writing seldom, straightforward, and we're targeting specific elements in pre-written sentences, then shifting towards generating and discussing examples. So you'll see in a few minutes. I've got some activities here, and then I'm going to just show you as an example for example purposes, and you're welcome to play along as I work through these. I have provided the full activity booklet that goes along with my selected examples, and it's in your folder. So if you're interested in digging into those, they're all there. It's a packet developed by William Van Cleve, and I wanted to honor his work by keeping that intact. And so you're welcome to check that out and take a look. But let's start again at the identify level, then we'll go to expand, combine, and create. So when we teach a particular skill in syntax, and in this case, we're focusing on adjectives, we begin at the identification level. And this is pretty standard grammar instruction with syntax. So I want to identify, I want to underline all the adjectives in the sentences. And I don't want kids circling articles. I just want them finding those adjectives. And so what I do to kind of help, notice I have number 3 in parentheses, number 3 in parentheses. I'm hinting to kids how many they'll find in that sentence. It's an additional level of prompt. So I give students an opportunity to find those adjectives. I've just highlighted them here on the screen, and then we discuss them. But we're looking for those adjectives, those words that describe, right? Describe nouns. You check your work. So with expanding, remember, identify, expand, combine, and create. Identify, expand, combine, and create. We're going to add at least 3 adjectives to each sentence to make it more descriptive. So the first sentence, the children and their leader took vans to a campground. You're welcome to pause here. And if you're up for it, in the chat, you can rewrite that sentence with 3 additional adjectives. At least 3 adjectives to make it more descriptive. You're welcome to add that to the chat if you're interested. The rude children and their valiant, valiant leader took colorful vans too. So it's interested in what you're going to come up with. But you can expand those sentences by adding adjectives, and you can put it in the chat if you're comfortable. Then same, over the campfire, the children roasted hot dogs and sang songs. So you could add your adjectives there. And then what we want to do is to optimally get your students to share their sentences. So I want to hear them articulate and speak and share and discuss. So I want to pause there and ask them to choose their favorite sentence from 1 or 2 and share it out. We want that interaction. We want oral language connected to writing. Then combine. So in this case, identify, expand, combine, and create. Combine, we're going to combine the following short sentences into 1 longer sentence. And so all of this is focused on adjectives centrally, but I'm having kids work and do sentence work at different levels of use. So we start essentially at a receptive level, that's identify, and we're working to more sophisticated levels of expressive use for their sentences. The reason why I think traditionally our grammar instruction hasn't worked is because we don't get kids into the expand, combine, and create part. We stay at the identification, and we want them to be able to use these words, in this case adjectives, in a meaningful way, in a rich way in their sentences. So you've got to get them and shift them into expand, combine, and create. And so my next example then is, all right, now you're going to write your own sentence. I'm going to give you some adjectives. They're happy, energetic, and you're going to write a sentence with at least 2 of your adjectives in it. So you moving through the different levels here to be able to get kids to use those words meaningfully and in their own writing. Again, the idea, if you notice, there's the shared component. Choose 1 or 2 to share with your group. So get kids to be able to read their sentence, share it, articulate it. Again, we're connecting oral language to written expression, and that share part is equally important as just doing the activity. So centrally, your instruction, your intervention is to enhance traditional syntax or grammar instruction by identify, which I think is traditionally there, right? But now expand, combine, and create. You're adding that to your intervention. Now, to reinforce this, so I think of IECC identify, expand, combine, and create as framing, as fundamental, as your base level for intervention. But there are definitely other ways here to be able to reinforce these skills. And now I want to show you some skill builders in this case. So when we're thinking about adjectives, I can show students the relationship between adjectives, common nouns, and potentially prepositional phrases in something called a grammar building chart. And so I can show students how I can play with language and words at a word level through a chart like this. What's really fun is to do an activity where I have students pass their paper. So let's just say I start with an adjective, the American author with a bestseller. What I might want students to do is, all right, I'm going to pass my paper to the right. And that person is just going to come up with any adjective, fabulous. So I'm going to write fabulous. Okay, pass your paper again. The next pass has to fill in the common noun, pass it again, write your prepositional phrase. And now we're collaborating on sentences. At the end, we can share, you'll get your paper back, right? My own paper. It started with me, Lena. I'll get my paper back. I'll review all the responses my friends, my peers filled out, and I'll choose the best one and share it with everybody, the one I like, the one that people write. It's fun. So trading papers and using these grammar building charts as an extension of your IECC instruction. And so here's written out. So if you'd like to see a description of how this could look, it's written here. Other things you can do is just prompt students to have some fun with different things. So if we're in the world of adjectives, write 4 adjectives to describe Steve Jobs. Write 4 adjectives to describe Rosa Parks. Write 4 adjectives to describe, right? Then you could do 4 verbs. And then put those together and share. So we're having fun at the word level with parts of speech, but notice how this is connected to vocabulary. That's why I want to note. I can describe Steve Jobs as good, but I can also describe him as interesting and complicated, and push in the vocabulary here. That's part of this. So just reflecting a little bit on the IECC routine, pausing here for yourself, I want you to think about how you can take that and enhance it in instruction. And if you've been using IECC, hold on, I want you to be able to expand it into vocabulary if you haven't done so. So I'm going to keep going here. What I want to do, as I said, is I want to expand this out into student vocabulary. So word choice, as you all know, plays such an important role in how we are scored on our writing samples. Right? Word choice, mature words, correct use of words, the variety of words we use, says something to a reader of our work about how well we know what we're writing about and how well we're communicating it. And so adding to IECC to promote vocabulary is focusing in on that word choice. And this connects directly to the kind of assessment stuff I was sharing earlier. Word choice is so important for expressive power. We want to reduce overused words. We want to help kids find alternative words, use a greater variety of words, all those things. And so what we're going to do is help students replace any overused words in their writing with more precise, stronger, mature words that can convey that meaning. And so this is what you do. This is a word choice intervention. I take a real simple sentence. He walked into the building, and now that we've done some work related to adjectives, for example, I can rewrite the sentence collaboratively with my students. So we can look at that. Don't you see the connection? The skills we've built through IECC, identify, expand, combine, and create, are now at play here in this word choice example. And so we will be rewriting this sentence to convey more interesting, fun meaning. Same here. We can have a nice short paragraph above. We had a nice holiday. Our nice relatives came to visit. We did a lot of nice things. My students write like this. Yes. Eating at 3 nice restaurants. It was a real nice vacation. And so we're going to have fun with that, take it apart together and rewrite those sentences, again, using our skills with adjectives, thinking about vocabulary, and do that. So same with verbs, you can do the same thing. Sometimes it helps to have a brainstorm list of words before you come into a rewrite word choice activity. So I might brainstorm verbs related to a topic that I might want to use. It gears me up. It's in a warm up, and it's an instructional warm up that I can bring in and use. So Jamie ran down the hall, and there's so many fun alternative words that we can use for that. More examples here. One of the things I advise related to this is to help students create a log or a writer's notebook or a place where they can keep their lists of interesting words. You want them to be able to draw on something for these activities, or if they're asked to make words more sophisticated. So one thing I might do is have if you're like doing this electronically, you have file folder where a kid has a Word document and it's called nouns. You have another document called verbs, another called adjectives, or hard copy notebook. I get an opportunity just to unload all the fun nouns related to a topic and list them all here. These are wordless word categories. It makes it easier for me as a writer to pull those into my work. So wordless, use the word notebook, use a writer's notebook or file system to help kids be able to keep track of their words and how they can use them in sentences. Finally, I want to show you how you can connect. Someone asked me about TDA. I want to show you how you can connect this level of instruction to an essay or to a composition. And I've used adjectives as my example. So now, as an other skill builder or support to IECC instruction, I might have this prompt card ready to go when my students are now writing and applying their adjectives in the context of an essay. So here's what I would direct them to do. Review the writing prompt and make a list of good adjectives. Write about the prompt, which is standard, and then ask yourself, does it make sense? And second, did you use good describing words? Did you use adjectives? If you want, you can even say, did you use adjectives? Did some include 7 words or more? If you want. Read your writing and ask yourself, did I write a good essay? Did I use good adjectives? And now you can fix your adjective, go back, fix it, add more adjectives. This, I hope you see, is in direct align with the instruction we're talking about, and it takes it into the essay or any kind of composition work that you're doing. So yes, you're working on foundational skills. Yes, you're talking about parts of speech and its syntax at the word level, but you can absolutely connect the dots so students are starting to apply this in their work. Here's a slightly more complicated one, but it's one to reflect. I'm just showing it to you. One to reflect on the essay that students are writing. And it connects at the word level, right? Are you using good adjectives? It's just another view of what we talked about, another format for it. It could be a self-reflection for students. So I want to conclude this section to tell you, if you are working with more sophisticated vocabulary, William Van Cleve has done an excellent presentation on something called morphology matters, where we're looking at how word meanings are derived from Latin and Greek and multisyllabic, multi-component words. And if you're looking at expanding word knowledge at that level, I just highly recommend it, as I do materials like this. The Rewards program by Anita Archer and colleagues is an excellent way to help students read the multi-syllabic, sophisticated words we're talking about here, because we want them to read them and we want them to write them. The rewards program is a good way to do it. Also, the Improving Morphemic Awareness from William Van Cleve as publisher are also a couple good sources for that work. So let me summarize where we are. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about it for a little bit with each other. So what we've done is we've started to dig in to fluency and syntax, and specifically applying syntax at the word level. And while we're doing that, we are taking a writing sample and scoring it at a more detailed level for measurable, like the measurable components we're talking about here. And then comparing an intervention with it. So for fluency, we talked about doing the copy, cover, compare. And then for the syntax at the word level, we talked about using the IECC routine, identify, expand, combine, and create. And then adding some skill builders, layering in some word use application, connecting it to the writing process. So those are all strategies that, or interventions, they're strategies that you can use with students. So I'm going to set you up for a breakout to just digest the content. You can talk about anything we've covered to date. I think if you want to focus in on something, I would suggest this last section on how you can go forward and integrate vocabulary with sentence level instruction. So how can you use the IECC routine if you're not currently using it? And if you are using aspects of that IECC routine, how can you push it more in the direction I just showed into vocabulary? How can you connect it to the writing process? How can you take that really narrow piece on parts of speech connected to vocabulary, connect to the writing process? So, and then discuss anything that may have resonated with you, how you might apply it in your instruction. So just take a few minutes basically to talk with your colleagues, digest the content. Before we go, one question I saw come up in the chat, and it was about, again, measurable components. I definitely recommend using it as a baseline. I think that go in there with the student you want to really work with. You can get example 10% mature words, using it as a baseline, apply the instruction that we just talked about. I hope there's growth, right? See if they've gained, adding a word or two, see if it 10% goes up to 12%, goes up to 15%. So that's exactly how I would approach it. So good. All right, same as before. Let's just do 10 minutes this time to reflect a little bit. We'll do a 10-minute breakout. I'll pop in a group or two and say hello. And yeah, just some time to debrief. Thanks, everybody. All right, do we have everybody back, Kirsten? We do. Okay, fabulous. Good, everybody. Any, I'm going to pause here and just check in with you. Any insights, ahas, things you're thinking about that you'd like to bring back to the larger group? Yeah, certainly as we go, you're welcome to include those notes in the chat. Keep the questions coming. I'll continue to check in. And so we're gonna proceed. So told you we're looking at 3 areas of writing instruction today: the fluency and transcription, syntax, mechanics. And in syntax, we're dividing syntax into the vocabulary, the word level, and we're looking at sentence structure. And so we just did the vocabulary. So now let's pop back in. We're still in the world of syntax. Let's cover sentence structure as we look at things. So let me get queued up to where I need to be on this. I'm sorry about that. Here we go. So we're truly now going into syntax and sentence structure. So the problem we're looking at in student writing relates to syntax, but in this case, it's not word use. It's not the word and how a part of speech is used or the vocabulary that's used. We're now looking at the general structure of that sentence. And that's the issue for kids. So we might see things where students are writing very simple sentences and you want them to break out of that simple sentence structure to write more complex sentences. That's just an example. I might have students who write run-ons all the time. And so in that case, you want to decrease the run-ons and increase the number of complete sentences. We're looking there at that kind of problem and how we will solve it through an intervention perspective. So one of the ways that you can document sentence structure is to look at and calculate percentages related to the types of sentences kids are writing. You can align this with your instruction. So for example, I could calculate the number of incomplete sentences in a 100-word sample, right? 100, take the first 100 words. I could calculate the number or percentage of the simple sentences being used, compound, complex, run-on, fragmented. Notice, however, just a subtle thing about this thing about calculating percentages. In some cases, I want decreases. So if I have 100% or 90% simple sentences, I want that to go down. So this measure, if I have too many run-on sentences, I want that to decrease. So in this case, I know we often are thinking about improving performance. In this case, some of these metrics I want to decrease, right? You want to have run-ons decrease. But anyway, let's just take a look at this. This is what is a sample, what the student wrote. Wildlands are lands. The lands are public. The lands are private. The lands support native ecosystems. The lands include landscapes. A grazed rangeland is a landscape. Active timberland is a landscape. So they wrote a total of 9 sentences here. 9 out of 9 are simple sentences. So 100% of this essay includes the use of simple sentences. So obviously, I think, right, the language the students are using is very simple, very simple in terms of sentence structure. So vocabulary in there is pretty okay. Rangeland, landscape, timberland, right? But the structure of the sentences is simple. So now if I see something like this, I'm going to want to approach my intervention to increase the sophistication of that writing. So a variety of different sentence types are used. Let me go back one. So when we're talking about counting different sentence structures, align this with your instruction. If I want to see a lot of compound sentences, count that. How many compound sentences out of the first 10 written, for example? How many full subjects and full predicates are used within? So you can vary your counts to align with your instruction. We want them focused on sentence types. Some we want to increase, right? Increase the complexity, decrease things like simple sentences, decrease the number of fragments used. And so that's how I would look at it and approach it. But overall, we're now in the syntax bucket, looking at sentence structure. How are you going to intervene? You continue to use identify, expand, combine, and create, but now you're applying it to overall sentence structure and the complexities of sentence structure. So we're out of parts of speech. And there's some skill builders that you can layer on to help, number 1, enhance your IECC instruction. And number 2, get it into the writing process, kind of like connect the dots for kids. So let me just show you some of these. We're moving from parts of speech to sentence parts. And essentially your sentence parts are layered. They're layered. They build from parts of speech, which are in the orange kind of font. And now we're layering on and building. Nouns and verbs are really simple subjects and simple predicates. We're looking at direct objects and prepositional phrases. We have a level up where we have a complete subject and a complete predicate that gives the entire meaning of what the words in the sentences equal up and add up to. So we're moving from parts of speech, the bottom, the orange, to how these words and phrases are connected and work in a sentence to build meaning. I'm going to show you just some examples. We're focused always on the doer and the do in the sentence, right? What's happening, and who's doing that happening. So let me define it. A subject, the subject is who or what is doing the action. So the subject is who or what is doing the action. It's the doer. And in this sentence, the hungry man ate quickly. The man is the subject, right? Because it's the man who is doing the action of eating quickly. The predicate is the action itself. It's the do. It is the happening. So the hungry man ate quickly. Ate is the simple predicate. And if I say ate quickly, it's the complete predicate, right? So you have the simple predicate and then the complete predicate with that whole idea. Doer and do, doer and do. So looking at some examples and then how you could apply the IECC, identify, expand, combine, and create. Identify, expand, combine, and create. But let me lead you into that a little bit. So let's just review subjects. Remember, it's the doer or who or what is doing the action. So in this case, the ferocious dog barked at my friend. Dog is the subject. The ferocious dog, right, is the full subject there. A storm in our town took down a lot of trees. It's the storm that did the action. That's underlined. And then the complete subject is a storm in our town. Several boys and girls played in the park. The simple subject, boy and girls. The complete subject is several boys and girls. And you know, I'm just showing you the examples to lead into this. And so we can do the identify. Let's look at specific sentences and find those things. This is your area of traditional grammar, I think, right? Where you're identifying receptively in a sentence, these component parts. So in this case, I would want students to underline the complete subject once and the simple subject twice. So the simple subject in this case is Harriet Tubman. It's also the complete subject. The simple subject in the second sentence is the path, and the complete subject is the powerful woman's path. We could check our work. Now that students understand what subjects and predicates are, we can use that vocabulary. We can ask students to write a well-developed subject to accompany the provided predicate. So play football on Friday nights around the country. Add something to that, right? Add the subject. Attend those games, rain or shine, to support their children, right? Add that. Combining sentences. So we work on a couple of examples where we're combining short sentences into a larger sentence. So the blockbuster made millions. It came out during the summer. It's like my kid example. It was action packed. So now we want to try a larger sentence. We're going to combine these simple sentences into this larger, more richer sentence. So overall, can I just show you structure here for a minute? When I'm working on these skills with kids, I don't need to do 10 identify examples. I can do 4, right? 3 to 5 examples. When I'm coming to do some sentence expansion, I don't have to do too many, maybe 2 or 3. Combine, same, 2 or 3. I can create these. I can pull sentences out of the literature my students are reading. I can connect it to the content that they're working on. We can work with real sentences from real sources, and it can have meaning. If I'm gearing kids up to be able to write something, I don't know, to respond in science class to something about photosynthesis, I can get them use this work to gear them up to write. I can have them look at sentences from their textbook. I can have them practice combining into a sentence that might be useful to them when they write about what we'll write about at some point. So we can really connect the dots with this kind of work. So anyway, identify, expand, combine, and create. Identify, expand, combine, and create. Finally, we're going to create a sentence here, and we're going to write a sentence using this person as a subject. And look, I'm pulling antagonist because I've taught that as a story grammar element to my students. They can now write their own sentence using that. So anyway, this builds. I've got some examples here for predicate, same. So I would build the instruction, the ferocious dog barked at my friend. Simple and complete, simple predicate, complete predicate. We're now looking at the action, what is happening, the doer, the doing, excuse me. A storm in our town took down a lot of fences, so it's took down a lot of fences, and we're looking for those things in the sentence. I'm teaching this, we're finding them, we're talking about them. And then we get into identifying a simple subject or predicate here. Is it a subject or predicate? I can ask students, is it a sentence or fragment? And we're going to get into looking at the compound and compound predicates next. It just builds, but what I want you to focus on is the IECC. That is the key, IECC. Identify, and if you've got a grammar program of some sort and you've got a lot of identify going on, you've got to move up into the expand and create. So if you're looking for a good resource that actually does IECC, identify, expand, combine, and create, I want you to know about William Van Cleve's work. Phenomenal. His Writing Matters, Teacher's Manual, and then Sentence Sense, student workbooks, hands down, I think is the best thing available to promote the IECC strategy. There are other sources that can give you sort of sentence types to work with. Don and Jenny Kilgallen also have some books, but they don't have the IECC as you would have to add that. Basically, you would have to go a little further than what they've got. The other thing noted here is the Hoekman method, the writing revolution is a fabulous text. It gives not only the research context in a pretty user-friendly way, but it provides examples for the classroom. So it's a very measured and good research to practice text. So another one I would add to the ones I mentioned this morning related to how you might use these tools in a professional learning community. So, and also, if you want to see the whole IECC structure presented dynamically, watch William Van Cleve's Syntax Matters presentation. He presented at Patents Literacy Forum, and we are so fortunate to have that recorded. So take a look at that, and you will see the master present the content in such a dynamic, full-on, full-force way. So when we're talking about syntax, we're looking at that IECC instructional routine as the strategy. Now I want to layer on some skill building to that and connect it to the writing process. So you can go from the instruction that seems more in isolation, though I did give you some suggestions about how to connect it to content and work that might be occurring in the classroom, but I want to take you through the whole thing. So one of the things that is helpful to students, and I'm thinking of struggling students in particular, because you want them to visualize something. Sometimes it helps them to be actively involved, get their body involved, is something called sentence unscrambling. It's a skill builder. So if I've taught a certain sentence type or structure, what I can do is actually have students play the role of words in a sentence. Like they can each get a little card. If I'm thinking of a traditional brick and mortar classroom, I get a little card that has my word on it, the, and I'm now the. And I have another student who might be fabulous with the word fabulous printed on their little card. And we have to work together to sort ourselves out to build a sentence. You can do this with virtual modification too. So just imagine your classroom of students, each with a little word card or phrase, but usually it's a single word. And what I want them to do is work together to sort their sentence out. One way that we can do it is just have those kids hold their sentence, but as a class who's not participating, we want to be involved and we want to move Jorge to the front of the sentence. We want to move, Felipe Alicia to a different part of a sentence. So we want to get them all sorted and organized. So let me just show you, if these were the word cards that I passed out to my students, evil, there's a couple of thes, mischievous children, gobbled, troll, and then under the bridge. I've already pre-linked under the bridge for you here. So I want everybody, like, just pause and think of what a good sentence might be using these words. You can work through it yourself. There's multiple ways we can do it, which is fun. Just take a look at that. Yeah, so my prepositional phrase under the bridge is already linked, but let me try to move some things in place. So I might approach it under the bridge. We have the evil troll, gobbled, the mischievous children. And then now what I can do is I can ask students to find the adjectives that describe nouns and the verbs that describe, right? Adverbs that describe verbs. We can link them. Evil describes troll, mischievous describes children, and we can link them up. In the classroom, you could have kids link arms and actually visually show the connection. So I have to move under the bridge as a unit, right? Because it's your prepositional phrase. Evil describing trolls now linked. So if I want to move evil troll somewhere, it's how I've got it. So what I'm showing you is it's fun to play around, scramble and unscramble sentences using what I know and apply it. Really effective intervention. Unscrambling sentences. Another one to layer on, and this comes from Joan DeSedita's book, contents related to writing and her writing rope, is to get kids to practice elaborating sentences using a set of cards. So imagine I have these are separate cut. Who, what, where, when, why, how, as separate cards. What I want to do, if I have a student start with something like the cat, I'm going to say, who is it? Now, what is it doing? Where is it doing it? When is it doing it? Why is it doing it? How? And then the tiny boxes are some ways to start that, right? Who did, or who can, or who would. It gives you how you can answer those questions. So written out, I'll show you how this could work. So we begin with the turtle. Did what? The turtle swims. Where did the turtle swim? My where card. The turtle swims in the ocean. I have to keep everything right as I move it down. Which turtle? The young turtle swims in the ocean. Have to keep that. Move it down. What color was she? The young green turtle swims in the ocean. Why? Why did she swim in the ocean? The young green turtle swims in the ocean in search of food. I keep going. Do you see how in the IECC routine, this is like pushing my expand just a bit more? So we had some really fun and simple ways in IECC to expand a sentence. It was like, here are 2 sentences, combine 1, or here are 3 sentences, combine 1. And in this case, this is providing additional prompting for students to be able to build out a sentence idea by asking questions. You can also give students directions like this for fun and using what they're learning in their syntax, sentence structure. So I could start with a noun or verb, ask kids to elaborate the subject. I can say, and add an article, elaborate the predicate, add adverbs, add a phrase. So I could have this scripted out on the board or on the screen and ask students to work through. We're going to start with a noun or verb, and now you take it through. You take these steps through, just like we did with the questions. But in this case, it's a little more complex because you're talking about things they've learned. Okay, my final thing, I want to make sure you're always connecting it to the writing process, what you're doing. And so here's an example of a revision strategy that's focusing on sentence expansion. It happens to be called the STAR strategy. And it's a good mnemonic for kids to work through all this. And so look at the STAR. So ask us to substitute overused words with precise words, take out unnecessary irrelevant information, add details, rearrange information. It basically, again, it's connecting the dots all through your instruction, from IECC, which is your base level instruction, to some skill builders that help enhance it, to finally getting it to the writing process and letting kids see that this is how it shows up in their writing and their essay. So I'm hoping in this section, you can see soup to nuts, if you will, of going from some kind of measurable component assessment where I'm looking at the nature of how students are using different sentence types. Then I implement the IECC instruction on wherever it is needed for student growth in grammar and syntax. And then I'm enhancing it and taking it to the writing process. So you're that's what I want you to see, connecting the dots through. So just a pause point, I'm going to check in with my patent team and see if there've been any questions about what we discussed so far related to syntax.
Not yet, Lena.
Okay, perfect. Well, let me just go in and summarize very quickly mechanics, and then I want some time to close things out and show you how I think I know in the ideal world, there's so many challenges these days, but in the ideal world, how I would see things be that you could implement them. So this is just a quick look at mechanics. Mechanics now is your spelling and punctuation and capitalization. So we're looking at micro level writing today. Fluency transcription is one, syntax is two, which we divided into word level, sentence structure level, and now mechanics. Mechanics, we can look at in writing samples. These are more traditional ways to look at a student's mechanics, how they are putting words together. Are you using the correct punctuation? We can calculate the number of spelled words spelled correctly in a writing sample. We can also code something called correct letter sequences, correct writing sequences, excuse me. So words spelled correctly, simply how many words spelled out of total words? That's it. And I want to try to get that to, I want that to be a high percent of correctly spelled words versus errors. Again, you do sort of do an individual. Where's my baseline? Where's kids starting? Then I get to focus on spelling to help improve it. I can do another writing sample, and I want to make sure that their errors are decreasing and correctly spelled words are increasing. I hope some of you have at least seen this or peripherally been familiar with calculating correct writing sequences. Some of the programs I mentioned to you, assessment packages that look at progress monitoring and writing, will do this automatically. What you're looking at when you're calculating correct writing sequences is the units. So for example, I start at the beginning of the word, beginning of the sentence, and it's capitalized as it should be. And the word it is spelled correctly as it should be. And so that's why I get the first caret. Then I look at it connected to was. Is that correct? Kind of grammatically, it was. Yes, it was. And so that's why I can get a caret there, a point essentially. And now I isolate was and dark. And I look at was dark. Was dark is meaningfully written properly. Those words are spelled correctly. And so I get a caret there. Then dark to the end of the sentence, dark to period is correct. So I get a caret there. You're basically looking at each little piece and if it's connected correctly. And that's how you'll count up correct writing sequences. You can see, let's look at the could seen. Let's look there, could seen. Could seen is incorrect. Those words are spelled correctly, but could seen is not a grammatically correct use of that language. And so I have no caret between could and seen. And seen the also, you kind of get double error. You get double errors there. But anyway, that's essentially what you're doing with correct writing sequences. With mechanics as the intervention, there's really three main things and why this is going to be such a quick kind of ending conclusion. If students have a lot of spelling errors, if students have a lot of spelling errors, you want to invest in an evidence-based spelling program, a strong spelling program. That is really the solution, and you've got to incorporate it into your implementation. So my answer there with spelling is purchase spelling is complex. You want a solid evidence-based program, and I've put some here, not exhaustive list, but some for you to consider. The other thing to do with spelling is to teach students a strategy for how to study and analyze and look at their words. And so some kind of self-study strategy for spelling is then layered onto your spelling program, right? Where I want to look at the word carefully, say it to myself, spell each other. This has to be written out and dissected for kids to be able to learn and look at those spelling words and with some care and closeness. So spelling program with a taught kind of one of these or similar spelling strategy. And then finally, I'm always connecting to the writing process, connect the dots. I want students to look for the things in their work, the capitalization, the overall appearance of something, punctuation and spelling. That COPS is very popular, and I think it's a good one. It's for a good purpose to connect COPS as your editing strategy when you're looking at your writing. So anyway, to sum up, mechanics is your spelling, punctuation, and capitalization. And spelling, you've got to have a program. Add in and layer in a self-study strategy. And then again, always connect this stuff so kids see the connection to their writing. And that comes back to my TDA response earlier. Yes, we're working on the sub skills, but when you show kids the connection and application to their essay, and in this particular example, TDA, they'll start to see that working on this stuff does improve their overall essay response. So good. Pause there, check in, and then I'm going to conclude. Anything? We're good to go? All right, everybody, here we go. So I want to review implementation with you, how all the pieces fit together, and how I envision, if you wanted to try this out, I hope you'll try it out, try this out in a classroom and come back and share implementation. We're going to follow this model. Identify the problem through your assessment. That problem, it can be identified, number one, through the rubric score, but then if you're suspicious about something, please drill down and get a baseline measurable, use the measurable components to get that baseline. Then from there, I want you to say, okay, am I focusing on fluency transcription? I'm going to do syntax, word level or sentence structure level, or mechanics. And then I've given you some guidance. It's like an intervention you could actually try. You're going to try it, implement it. And then to the greatest extent you can, do it well. I mean, I know the realities, things will come up as obstacles for sure, but commit and do it well. So part of this process is that assessment piece, just to review, where you're going to collect a student writing sample. You're going to give a prompt, give a short planning component, and then a time piece, 20 minutes to get an overall composition. If you think you need to calculate anything in a fluency window of that 3 minutes, right? If you think you're going to need to calculate that or find that first 3 minutes for fluency, you're going to teach students how to denote that on their paper or on their screen somehow to get, so you have that marked out. You're going to score the entire writing sample with your analytic rubric. And then depending on where you're heading, which way you're going, you're going to score with your measurable components. And you're going to get that baseline, because I want you then to do the intervention and then score with the measurable components again and see if there's change. The whole idea of this process is to figure out the student difficulty and then match the strategies that go with it. So we talked about our focus on fluency and transcription and conventions today. I wanted to bring you back to this. This is outlining the measurable components aligned with fluency and transcription. So you have it right here as a map with my notes. So if I'm digging into conventions, you're going to do the smarter balanced rubric. You're going to get a total score and convention score, and then you're going to do the measurable components in area of need. You don't have to do all the measurable components in area of need. And then match it to a strategy. So if I know this, right, if I'm really, it's clear to me that syntax maturity in vocabulary is a problem. Kids are writing really short words, 4 letters or less. I'm going to come onto my intervention map and look at the convention syntax vocabulary checklist as a refresher for what we talked about. And here it gives you your guidance for intervention. Implement that IECC routine. And if I want, I can enhance it with those skill builders. You go back and check the presentation today to find some of those. You don't have to do all of them. You can find one or two that make the most sense. Same. So let's say that the students have trouble with conventions and syntax, as by my assessment here. I now match it with convention syntax. I implement the IECC routine, identify, expand, combine, and create. And I might enhance it with a skill builder. I might enhance it by connecting it to the writing process, just so students have something more concrete. And so that's how you can use these maps. So finally, what I want to show you is something called a fidelity checklist. It can, and what does a fidelity checklist mean? It essentially means that I have some kind of guidance on how to implement the instruction we talked about, that's aligned with the evidence, what the research says is effective about instructional delivery. I like to think of a fidelity of implementation checklist, honestly, as a self-reflection tool. I think it really can be a really good self-reflection tool. Yes, if you're here as a team and you want to elevate this, it could be used at a school level. You can observe each other teaching and you could fill out this checklist. But overall, it's self-reflection to make sure if I'm teaching that I'm hitting some of these components and I can reflect and think about that implementation. So let me just for a minute show you the real document, because I shared a Word document with you today as a place where you can find these checklists. So let me go there and show you what your actual packet looks like. It looks like this. This is the cover page. It's fidelity of implementation. And here is the first checklist. So let's look at this carefully. You're thinking about whether something's fully implemented, like, yes, all in. Partially, like, yeah, I did some, I think it could be a little better or more thorough, or it's not just not implemented. And so here are the items that align with today's session. The first is you're using assessments of student writing to inform instruction. We talked about that. The smarter balanced rubric or some rubric. So in one of my breakouts today, we were talking about a rubric aligned with other content, GED, for example, that could be here and substituted, is used to score student writing samples. Please note, when you score using your rubric, get an overall total score. Also isolate your convention score, your sub-score. So you'll get an overall total score and a sub-score on conventions. The measurable components are used to identify writing challenges in the areas we talked about. Appropriate writing strategies aligned with assessment in areas of instructional need are taught. So that was the matching. Use your maps that I shared to match that. They give you guidance, see instructional strategy checklist. Writing strategies are taught explicitly using a model, practice, reflect, right? So we talked about, model, guide, independent practice, but there's that student reflection for older grade students. Concepts are introduced clearly and succinctly with visual and verbal explanations. For all of what we're doing, your instruction is sentence focused. Students are engaged in expanding, combining, and creating their own writing in the area of need. They create their own examples. They share the examples. And students' examples are used to clarify and expand knowledge. So we'll talk about the examples, right? You're talking about the student examples. So this essentially is holding up, right, as your overall fidelity of implementation checklist for this session. This is what's aligned as the fidelity tool. Just so you know it's here, if you head down a page, you have a more in-depth checklist called attributes of high quality writing instruction. This list is based on Gary Troya's writing for the Cedar Center. And so remember that document I shared, one of them at the very beginning of this session. What I did is I pulled out the variables discussed in that evidence-based practice document from the Cedar Center and just made something a little more in depth. So this would be great for your teams. I think this is a good team tool to think about how writing instruction is working at the core ELA level. So just note you've got two tools and they're slightly different and their purpose is different. One is highly aligned for implementation in this session, and the second is more in-depth for potential team discussion and use. So let's get back to it and kind of close things out here. So that's your implementation, doing it well with the fidelity tool as guidance. And then to evaluate how it works, you reassess student performance, administer that writing prompt, score it with the rubric, total score, convention score, and do your measurable components. Whoops, sorry, I skipped to the end here and don't want to be there. So anyway, one of the things that we're going to be doing, basically, if you're interested, come back and join me in early November on November 3rd and share how things have gone. I'd love to know. And to do that, essentially a ticket in the door, if you will, is to put together a presentation on your efforts to try these strategies. Embedded in this presentation, your larger PowerPoint, is the template that you can use to present and share implementation when you return on the 3rd. There's a separate PowerPoint that just has the template in it. It's part of our materials, but it's here embedded just so you can see. And I'm going to just show you the kind of thing we're going to talk about if you come back. So if you're implementing with as a team, introduce your team. If you're yourself, introduce yourself. Introduce your school. So share some demographics. If there's something interesting or notable about your school that we would like to know, share that. Then identify the problem. What's the problem? And you're going to just say what it is. My students have difficulty in transcription. My students, excuse me, have difficulty with syntax, vocabulary. So what is it? Just identify it. That's all you have to do here. Now talk about what you're going to do. So now match that up with your intervention. If your students have difficulty with transcription, talk about how you implemented a fluency warm-up, right? And added that to your instruction. If students had difficulty with conventions at the syntax vocabulary level, talk about what you did here. It'd be great if you could show some instructional examples if you have anything to bring in and share. Do it and do it well. So this is the part where you talk about implementation, what worked, what didn't work as well. You can use that fidelity of implementation tool to kind of guide the focus of this. And then talk about, did it work? And here's where you can present data. There's a table ready for you. You can just fill it in. I know we don't have a lot of time between now and our follow-up in November, but essentially, if you're going to try it, that gives you the opportunity to do a writing prompt at the beginning of October, implement during October, and then at the very end of October, coming up on that November 3rd, give that writing prompt again. Give that writing prompt again. Give yourself enough time to score it, but give that again. So just the way that this is spaced, our sessions, I think I would want to optimally to do, we'll give you a little more time space between your baseline, your first assessment, and your next one at the end of the October, but that's what we're working with. So beginning of October, do a writing prompt, in the end. Remember, you don't have to do this with the whole class. You can pick a couple students, right, to keep it small and manageable. And look at what we're looking at. We want a total rubric score, all domains added up. We want the convention score isolated, and then whatever measurable component or two that you might be scoring when you dig in and you do the counts on that student writing sample. Get it for beginning of October, end of October. And then share it so you can fill out the table. But if you want to graph it, do a simple graph, or you want to share student writing samples because they drastically changed maybe across October, there's a difference we can see, that kind of share some visuals. And then anything you're reflecting on, how are you going to keep going with the work? What are you going to do to move forward? So essentially that is the presentation template to return and share, which takes us to the end of the session. So let me sum up. I'll pause to check in with questions, and then if my Pat and colleagues have any words to wrap up, I'll turn it to you. So overall today, we went on this journey where we're looking at micro level writing instruction, and related to micro level writing instruction, we're talking about how to link assessment to instruction. And linking assessment to instruction, we're using the rubric, an analytic rubric like Smarter Balanced, with a total score and a convention score. And then in the areas of fluency / transcription, 1, 2, conventions, which breaks down into vocabulary and sentence structure. And big 3 is mechanics. We've got some interventions that you're able to implement, and some measurable components that you can look at in assessment lens. I'm looking at those measurable components because I want you to see growth, and there's more likely a scenario to see growth at that level versus your rubric score. There you go. All right, everybody. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to present with you today. And I will stay on a little bit if you have questions at the end. Put those in chat, but I definitely want to turn it to my Pat and colleagues to conclude. Thanks.